justice system, also ending mass incarceration, driving down racial disparities. The Commonwealth's attorney has discretion when it comes to what charges to bring, what sentence and bail to recommend, if someone's diverted to treatment or locked up. They also negotiate plea deals and decide in what cases it is appropriate to charge a juvenile as an adult. They have the opportunity and the power to make and lead the case for criminal justice reform. And so in this case, they are competing for the position for Fairfax County and Fairfax City. Before I introduce our moderator tonight, I want to take a moment to recognize our partners. So we have the ACLU-Virginia, People Power of Fairfax, Virginia Interfaith, and the Fairfax County NAACP. I'm proud to say that we're all part of a much larger movement, a growing movement of organizations that are looking at what the prosecutor's role is around the country. So our moderator for tonight's forum is Secura Cook, and she is the director of the Justice Reform Program of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, where she leads the development of the Justice Reform Program policy agenda and coordinates the program's communications, organizing, and policy advocacy strategies for a broad coalition of civil and human rights groups. The Justice Reform Program works to advance policy solutions that eliminate structural inequity, racism, and injustice at every stage of the justice system, from policing and pre-trial justice to sentencing and incarceration to reentry. So, thank you.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you to the host for having me today to moderate this important discussion. I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight, and we also want to thank Dr. Vernon Walton, Senior Pastor of First Baptist Church of Vienna, and Reverend Clevester Hawkins, Associate Pastor of First Baptist Church of Vienna, for letting us use the space tonight. My name is Secura Cook, and I will be moderating the forum this evening. We are here tonight to gain a better understanding of where these candidates stand on key criminal justice reform issues. Because, as Beth explained, the power of this role is unparalleled in our criminal justice system. Now, I will go through the rules for tonight's forum. For the audience, we ask that you refrain from clapping until the forum is over and silence your phones again at this time. If you have a question you would like to ask, please write it down on one of the note cards provided and pass it to a volunteer. We will be collecting your questions for the audience portion of tonight's program. Candidates, you will each get 3 minutes for an opening statement. Then I will be asking you questions, and you will get 1 minute and 30 seconds each for a response. When you have 1 minute left for the opening and closing statement, our timekeeper, who will be sitting right here, will hold up this 1 minute sign. They will give you a 30 and 15 second warning by holding up these signs at that time. And when you are out of time and must stop, they will hold up this red sign that says stop. Very easy. There will be an additional minute and 30 seconds reserved for me to follow up on the question if I choose. There will also be a lightning round of yes and no questions and time reserved for questions from our audience before both candidates will have 2 minutes to give their closing statements. At this time, we will begin the program with opening statements. Each candidate will have 3 minutes. We will start in ballot order with Mr. Ray Morrow and then Steve Descano. Mr. Morrow, please introduce yourself and tell us why you want to be Fairfax County and Fairfax City's Commonwealth's attorney.
Thank you, Secura. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out on this beautiful evening to hear about this very important race to our county. My name is Ray Morrow. I'm your Commonwealth's attorney. I've been a prosecutor really all my life after leaving defense practice in 1983. I was first elected Commonwealth's attorney in the 2007 race when my boss retired. So I am a career prosecutor. I've tried many, many serious cases, from the DC snipers to the UVA serial killer Jesse Matthews to the recent murder of a 15-year-old child by MS-13. I'm very experienced in the courtroom and very able. But I want you to know more about my position, because a lot of people think a prosecutor's job is to put people in jail, and I've never thought that was a central part of my job. My job is to make this community healthier by one, keeping you safe, and two, reaching my hand out to help everyone I can. So in that vein, we've done a lot of progressive things in Fairfax, and I didn't just start recently. I started when I was first elected by opening up the discovery process completely, open file discovery. Back in 2007, I testified for Chap Peterson's bill to do that. We have a veterans court where we help our veterans. We have a drug court where we try to get people who are addicted and don't belong in jail the treatment they need. We have a mental health court for people who find themselves in jail. We try to get them out and get them treatment. And I also have a Diversion First program, which I was on the leadership team when it was established. And we have diverted 1,600 people from jail where they don't belong to Merrifield and other treatment facilities to get the help they need. I've also worked hard to reduce mass incarceration. Our jail population is the lowest it's been in decades. I'm very proud of that. I think that's because all of these programs are working. Fairfax County is a county that works. Perhaps I'm most proud of the work we've done to bust the school-to-prison pipeline, where our juvenile detention center, which is built to hold 150 children, has less than 20 kids in it right now. And they're all there for very serious crimes, murder, rape, things like that. So we're working to improve the system. We're working to make it better. We're working to heal those we can heal, but I'm also here to protect you should the worst happen. This job is a very important job. I bring progressive policies to this office, and I always have. If you look at my record, if you look at what I stand for, you'll see that in every instance, I've done the kind thing, the right thing, the thing that helps make this community healthier, and I hope you'll support me on June 11th. Thank you, folks.
Hi, everyone. There you go. I'm Steve Descano. My whole life and my whole career, as a matter of fact, has been about leadership and helping others. It's the reason why, as a young person, I went to the United States Military Academy at West Point and served as an officer in the United States Army. It's the reason why I spent years as a federal prosecutor under the Obama administration, traveling all around this country, doing cases and seeking justice. And I've also done that locally as a board member of NAACP Pro-Choice Virginia with my extensive work with the Fairfax County NAACP, and as one of the founding members of the county's Police Civilian Review Panel. And it was through that local work, where years of local work, where I started to put a critical eye towards our criminal justice system. And what I found, quite frankly, shocked me. We've only had 2 Commonwealth attorneys since 1967. We haven't had a primary for this position since 1963. And really, if you take a look at Fairfax County between 1963 and today, you will see that we have changed dramatically. But if you take a look at our criminal justice system, you will see that we have not kept pace. We've stagnated, we've become entrenched, we haven't kept up with the needs of the county. And we need to change that. We have an opportunity. As a matter of fact, this is my plan for reform. It's called progressive justice. I'm the only one in this race for the plan to bring real criminal justice reform to our system. And really, it's every policy in here is based on our community values of community, equality, and justice. The idea is that we need a criminal justice system that's open and transparent and accountable, not shaded in darkness and not giving away half-truths. The idea that we treat everybody equally, regardless of the color of your skin, how much money you make, or which part of the county you live in. And the idea that we need a criminal justice system to take a holistic approach that builds up our communities and makes us stronger instead of one that breaks us down. And really, we need a criminal justice system that reflects those values, not the way that it's always been. Because if we had those values in our criminal justice system, we wouldn't have a Commonwealth attorney who sued Governor Terry McAuliffe to stop giving voting rights away to people after they paid their debt to society, just because that's the way it's always been. We wouldn't have one that went to D.C. to fight against the Obama administration's plan to end decades of failed tough on crime, war on drugs policy. And we wouldn't have one that leads a conservative national organization that endorsed Jeff Sessions because they're comfortable with his retrograde and backwards view on criminal justice. We have a generational opportunity on June 11th. The first time in 56 years to really bring progressive criminal justice reform to our system. I ask you each to go on my website, read my plan, Progressive Justice, and I'm very grateful that you're here. I'm very much looking forward to speaking with you about the need for criminal justice reform now. Thank you.
Thank you. So the first question is to you, Mr. Morrow, to answer first. Again, you have 1 minute and 30 seconds for your response. Recently, John Cruzat of Texas set a goal of decarcerating Dallas County by 15 to 20% in his first term. His plan to do that includes changing pretrial detention policies to err on release and instructing his prosecutors to not pursue theft charges of necessary items valued under $750. These are practical changes, all within the Commonwealth attorney's discretion. Will you commit to a specific percent reduction in the incarcerated population of Fairfax County? If so, what percent, and what are some of the ways that you will accomplish this reduction?
Thank you, Sakura. Well, I'll tell you right up front, I can't commit to a percent that I would reduce the jail population by. What I can tell you is I'm working now to reduce it, and it has been reduced to record low levels. The way to do that is the way we're doing it. We have a very robust supervised release program in our jail. We don't ask for cash bail. There's a lot of talk about cash bail, and I understand it. I don't favor private entities being involved in our system, like bondsmen and such, who are not accountable. So we don't ask for cash bail. We have a supervised release program where we do drug testing, we work with people, we allow them to call in so they don't lose their jobs, they don't have to report. That's part of what's keeping our jail population down. As far as charges, we have a diversion program for first-time shoplifters where they don't get a conviction. We've had that since I joined the office, before anyone else had it in the region or in the state. So you get a free bite at the apple to begin with, but I will say, no, I can't commit to saying that I won't prosecute thefts under $750. The elderly are ripped off in this country to the tune of $37 billion a year. A lot of that money comes from folks, even in these neighborhoods here, where people work on trees and such, and they forge the checks and they steal the money, and I won't stand idle and watch it happen. Thank you.
You know, mass incarceration is a serious problem, even here in Fairfax County. And it's something, as you mentioned, that the prosecutor can do a lot about. And I intend to do something about it. You know, there are a number of ways that we can reduce our incarceration population. The first one is stop asking for cash bail. Because I will tell you what, regardless of what you just heard, 45.9% of the people who are eligible for pretrial release in Fairfax County have to pay cash bail before they're released. There's a reason why when you walk out of the courthouse doors, the first thing that you see across the road, is a giant blue bail bond sign. Because cash bail gets asked for every single day in Fairfax County, and it's a problem. I'll end it. The other thing I'm going to do, you mentioned theft. I know in my office I'm not going to charge felony larceny under $1,500. I'm not going to ruin somebody's life and put them in jail for stealing an iPhone and making a single mistake. I'm also not going to prosecute simple possession of marijuana cases because we know the deleterious effects that has on people's lives and how it drives this incarceration population. And the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to look wherever possible to charge more misdemeanors instead of felonies wherever appropriate, because we know that the prosecutor's charges, that's really what has driven this mass incarceration population. Now, as far as a simple percentage goes, I don't know exactly what it's going to be because we need to get more data, but based on my estimates, the cash bail issue alone is probably going to get us at 5%. And I know that when we do these other things that I'm talking about, we're going to push way past that 5%, but that's my commitment to do it, to get past that number.
Misdemeanor charges make up approximately 80% of state and local dockets nationwide. The majority are for minor offenses like trespassing, loitering, and drug possession. These arrests and convictions can significantly affect people's lives even when they result in short sentences or probation, costing people their jobs, housing, student loans, immigration status, and even their children, and contributing to a cycle of incarceration and poverty that is hard to break. Are you willing to not charge misdemeanors, such as trespassing or loitering, which are associated with poverty, mental illness, and homelessness? What charges, if any, would you commit to not prosecuting because of their disproportionate impact? Mr. Descano.
You know, I agree with you 100%. A lot of people think that if it's not a felony, it doesn't hurt people. But as you stated, even misdemeanors have effects that carry through someone's lives forever. You can't get an education, can't find a place to live, you can't get a good job, and it pushes you back into a cycle of more crime, decreased opportunity, increased poverty, more crime. We've got to break that. You know, one of the things that I'm really committed to, you mentioned drug possession and drug crime. Well, first of all, I already mentioned it. I am never going to charge. I'm going to ask to get all charges dismissed when they're related to simple possession of marijuana. Because even if you go through a diversion program, and you succeed with that diversion program, that's something that's going to follow that person for the rest of their life because it can never be expungable. When it relates to other drug crimes, I don't want to charge those either. What I want to do is I want to put in place systems that actually help people. And not drug courts by names only, that don't take into account the secondary consequences for the rest of people's lives, which is what we have now, by the way. Our so-called drug courts really ignore all the facts that you brought up. But building an actual drug court system where we help people get through their addiction problems, but also come out on the other end without charges, so they can get an education, they can get a job, they can raise their family, and not be pushed back into a cycle of recidivism and more crime. Those are the commitments that I'm ready to make because I understand how important it is to not tag people with consequences that are going to follow them and ruin them for the rest of their lives.
Thank you. Thank you, Sakira. Okay, just to start out here, I have to remind everyone that, as you already know, we are a nation of laws, not men. I'm not a super legislator. I can't decide and should not decide what laws to prosecute and what not to prosecute, nor should Steve. The Supreme Court has just ruled that the prosecutor in Norfolk who's refusing to prosecute marijuana cases is out of bounds, and they rejected his attempt. We don't put people in jail for marijuana. We divert them. It's fine with me if they decriminalize marijuana. Be a good thing, in my view. But we have diversion programs for marijuana, for theft, for trespassing, all of these crimes. But some of the misdemeanors are peeping toms, domestic violence, believe it or not, if there's not a serious injury to the woman, is a misdemeanor. And these are serious cases. A lot of the misdemeanors are serious cases. The reason some people don't want, cash or some of the cash bonds in those cases are not because we ask for them. Again, we never ask for cash bail. It's by statute, the judges said it, and the people don't want a cash. They don't want to go on the supervised release because they want to take urine tests. So they ask for cash bail. The public defenders ask for cash bail. The defense attorneys ask for cash bail. We don't ask for cash bail. It's not a monolithic system across the country or even in the Commonwealth. So we're sensitive to all these things. I generally agree with Steve, but he's not tried a case in our courthouse, so he doesn't understand how it works.
I have a follow-up question to both Mr. Morrow and Mr. Descano. So supervised release was mentioned several times. And often it is the case that when individuals are placed on supervised release, there are onerous conditions that are placed on them that also interfere with them living their everyday lives, whether it's electronic monitoring that a person has to place on their ankle and check in every so often, or go visit a probation or parole officer. How will you ensure that that individuals who come through the criminal justice system in Fairfax County are not onerous conditions are not placed on individuals that often will impact their lives? Mr. Moore, yes.
Thank you, Sakira. Well, we strive to do that. We work closely with our SRP unit. I'm very proud of it. It's very well staffed and it's a very robust program. And we're sensitive. We train on criminal justice reform. I actually teach on it across the nation. We're aware that people can if they lose their driver's license, for instance, they lose their job, their family cycles in poverty. Same thing with having to report at 12 noon in the middle of a workday to a probation officer. But we get it. We're already doing all this. We have social workers who work with the defendants. Everyone is presumed innocent. They're all presumed innocent. We treat them that way. But sometimes people have drug problems. The court will put conditions on them. Sometimes the parents want a condition, like a drug screen or something. So all I can tell you on that score is we really do our best to minimize those consequences. I'm well aware of the problem. Again, very few people belong in jail, in my opinion. Only those who are dangerous or continually steal from our citizens.
what you bring up regarding supervised release is a very serious issue, right? A lot of times people are put on supervised release and it's almost as if they are set up to fail, right? They're set up to break their conditions of supervised release, so they end up in jail. And what we need to do is we need to continue to be sensitive to that and realize that the reason that we are putting these onerous conditions on people is simply because we're scared that maybe they're not going to show up to court. But we know if we look at the data, you know what the most effective way to get somebody to court is? It's with a phone call or a text message. Because people don't not show up to court because they're running or they're doing other things, it's because their life is hectic, right? It's because they have many, many things going on. Many times maybe they might be working poor, they're working multiple jobs, they have child care issues, and they simply forget. So what we need to do is we really need to really focus on what it takes to get people to court. And what that means is instead of putting these onerous conditions on people, start to work with organizations so that instead we create systems and expand systems that do other things that are lower cost, like phone calls and text messaging to get people into court. Really, if we start to take a look at what works with the data, not works with the same old, the way that it's been for decades, if we look at the data and actually try to be a smart system, we can beat this and we can get rid of some of those onerous conditions.
Thank you both. Data collected from the Vera Institute, an independent national research nonprofit, on the population of Fairfax County's local jail reveals that Black people are incarcerated at nearly 4 times the rate of white people. If elected, how will you address these racial disparities in Fairfax County? Are racial disparities currently tracked and analyzed? And if so, what is the plan for releasing that information to the public? Mr. Morrow.
Thank you, Sakura. I will tell you that this is a problem not only in Fairfax County, but across the nation. And I think it has a lot of roots in our history, also in implicit bias, which a lot of people may not think about, but it's a real problem. We train on it. That's one thing we do. The police train on it. But I do think this is a matter that deserves great study. And I've spoken to a couple of senators who have endorsed me in this race that we probably should get a JLARC study or a crime commission study of this problem. And I would, for one, be willing to share every bit of data I have. And I'm told that a lot of the people in our jail are not actually from Fairfax County. They're passing through for one reason or another. But it's still a huge disparity. And there's something wrong with that. And I'm willing to do it. I will tell you, I have 34 lawyers in a jurisdiction of 1.2 million. So I don't have a technology person, but I'm going to try to get one so we can look at this. Because if you go to a historically Black church, or you talk to Black folks generally, every one of them has a story. They were pulled over when they were just driving to church, or they were taking the kids for ice cream, and we got to do something about it, and I'll do something about it.
You know, I think what you bring up is a huge issue. And really, data is key here. We do need to get the data because what we understand is that the discrimination in our system mostly is systemic, which means it's hidden, which means we need to find the data so that we can pull it out and extrapolate where the issue is so that we can change. Now, I'm glad that my opponent says that he needs the data, but respectfully, you've had 12 years to get the data and still no data. You know, asking people, you have 12 years to ask people. Hasn't happened. What we need is we need somebody who's actually going to get in there and actually get the data and push for reform. I'm not even in office yet, and I've already talked to multiple organizations that will come in for free and go through the data that we have collected, audit it, break it down by demographics so that we can figure out exactly what's going on. And I'm committed to doing that. And not only that, I'm committing to putting that data out, not just for me, but for you guys. Because the way we're going to get this solved is to have someone in this position who's actually going to be accountable for solving this problem. So not only am I going to put the data out there, but I'm going to put my solutions out there. And then I'm going to go all around the county, and what I'm going to talk about is how well we're doing with implementing those solutions. Because the way that we stop that, it stops here in the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office. But not just words, not only just talking the talk, but actually walking the walk. And I'm somebody who's going to walk the walk. I've proven it before. I'll do it again. You're not going to be waiting 12 years for the data. I'm going to be getting it starting day one.
Thank you. Nearly half of the people in Virginia's jails are awaiting trial and have not yet been convicted of a crime. The Virginia Department of Criminal Justice Services is currently conducting a snapshot analysis of Virginia's pretrial system, and initial results are shocking. Nearly 40% of those held are African American, despite only making up 20% of the population. 60% are being held on misdemeanor charges only, and another 15% are just probation violations. In addition, nearly half of Fairfax County pretrial population has a cash bail hanging over their head. How do you plan on restoring the presumption of innocence in Fairfax County and increasing the percentage of those released on their own recognizance without conditions? Mr. Descano.
I'm really glad you asked that question, and I'm really glad that when you did it, you put all those percentages and all those facts in there, so I don't have to really go through the fact that cash bail exists in Fairfax County, and it's a huge problem in Fairfax County. But there's a pretty simple way to solve it. What you do is what I plan to do, which is I'm going to tell my prosecutors that once someone is determined independently by a judge to not be a danger to the community, to not ask for cash bail. Now, the idea that our prosecutors have no say in whether cash bail gets applied or not is quite frankly ridiculous on its face. I think everybody in here can recognize that. The fact of the matter is, when you go to the bail hearings, the judge makes the final decision, but 99.99% of the time, they go with what the prosecutor recommends. I'm committed to ending cash bail because what happens when you have a cash bail system is you take a system that's supposed to be equal and you create a two-tiered system of justice where you penalize poor people simply for being poor. That's not Fairfax County values. I'm going to stop that. And the other thing is, we want people at home living in their houses, working their jobs, raising their family, because otherwise, when people are held because they can't afford bail, that creates recidivism even years down the line. And holding somebody in Fairfax County Jail for no good reason costs the taxpayers $225.20 every single day. So what we're doing is we're spending $225 every day to create more crime down the road. That doesn't make sense. I'll take the simple, no-nonsense solution of just telling my prosecutors to not ask for cash bail for people who aren't dangerous. That's how we're going to solve that problem.
Well, I've already done that, and apparently the problem isn't solved. So I've told my assistants, don't ask for cash bail. What the situation is, the statutes of Virginia call for the magistrate to set cash bail. There's no prosecutor there for that. Then the next morning, the judge reviews it. He can raise it, he can lower it. We can't. All we can do is ask a judge in an appropriate circumstance, and we often do. Defense attorneys come and say, hey, listen, my guy doesn't want to go on supervised release. He doesn't want any conditions. Would you agree to a $1,000 bond and ask the judge to reduce it from $5,000? And if the person's out of danger, we'll say sure. But it's always up to the judge. We don't do it. We don't ask for cash bail. But to say that you'll never ask for conditions, a lot of the people in jail are not in there for biting their nails, even on misdemeanors. I mean, they're stalking people. They're peeping in the windows. Some of the conditions are stay away from Mary Jones's house. Don't go back to St. Mark's Church, someone vandalizing, things like that. We do this compassionately. I mean, it's not that we don't have any common sense with respect to these things. And the jail population is lowering constantly, and it's because of all these programs. Our supervised release people meet with the defendants upon intake by the next morning, and then if they're not out in 2 days, they meet with them again, and if they're not out within that time, we hear about it. And we work with them independently of the attorneys to get folks out of jail who are not a danger. But failing to appear can hurt people too, especially the elderly and poor immigrants.
Follow-up question. So given that 60% of people in Fairfax County jails are being held on misdemeanor charges only, and about 15% are just probation violations, and then also you have individuals who have almost half of them have a cash bail amount held over their head, would either of you support any efforts to end bail in Fairfax County? In money bail in Fairfax County. Mr. Morrow?
Okay. Yes, I would. I think it's something the government should take care of. The government should be involved in criminal justice, not private entities, not bondsmen, not bounty hunters. Some people think the system works. I've never been a fan of it. Some defense attorneys tell me, oh, don't do away with cash bail, my clients really need it. I think the government should run that, just like there should be no private prisons. Whoever's running this stuff should be accountable. I'm accountable. You can vote me out on June 11th. We need to be accountable, and we are accountable for these things. And that's why we work so closely with the supervised release program to make sure these things don't happen. The numbers, it's hard to know. When you say misdemeanors, could be multiple drunk drivings, that's misdemeanors. Just probation violations, could be a rapist contacting his victim. It could be a domestic abuser, and most often is contacting the wife, showing up on her lawn. That's a probation violation. Some of those things are pretty darn serious, so we have to be cautious as we work to fix the system.
You know, of course I would end cash bail. That's something I talk about everywhere I go. I don't need to tap dance around it. Cash bail creates a two-tier system of justice, penalizes poor people for being poor. That's not our values. I'll fight tooth and nail to end it. I'm not going to hide behind anything else and say it's somebody else's responsibility. It's our responsibility. We're the one who, the Commonwealth's attorney is the one who's accountable, and I'll be accountable to you. And I'll tell you, I'm actually glad to hear my opponent say that he's against cash bail, because I remember from a story in the Washington Post less than a year ago when a judge in Fairfax County said that he wanted to get rid of cash bail. Mr. Morrow was quoted in the papers questioning that, saying, well, basically cash bail is an important part of our criminal justice system. The fact of the matter is, we need to get rid of cash bail because cash bail is an anachronism from a system that is long past. We know with data, studies, and years of experience that cash bail doesn't keep us safer, doesn't make people show up to court more, and all it does is hurt families and create more crime down the road. It's time that what we did is we got away from the old system that doesn't work simply because that's the way that it's always been, and actually embrace new and reform and things that are data-driven and things that will help and actually make our community more safe. The time for reform is now, and it can start with cash bail.
Mr. Morrow, this question is for you. Well-designed diversion programs and specialty dockets can be a way to help ensure people suffering with addiction and mental health issues get the treatment they need without having to suffer the serious collateral consequences of a conviction. These programs keep people in the community instead of behind bars. What are the current programs that exist in Fairfax County? How many people are currently participating in them? And what will you do to make diversion programs more accessible to all and incentivize defendants to choose these intense programs over probation?
Thank you, Secure. The key word there is these intensive programs. We sent our assistants out for a year to train on this around the country. Our program is got the imprimatur of our Supreme Court. They worked very hard to get one that works, and that's the model we're using, and it's a national model. The thing is, it is intense. People with drug addictions, they're very sick, and it's very hard to get them off the drugs, and they're gonna have relapses. They're gonna use again. And so the drug court is very intense. They get the defendants in very quickly to hold them accountable, to try to stop them. Instead of the old system, they'd wait a few months before they'd come see the judge. By that time, they've spiraled down, and their family is hurt even worse, and they're hurt. But I want to be clear that the drug court that we have is for people in big trouble with drugs. They're doing other crimes, they're stealing other things. They've got a real bad problem. Most of the people who are involved with the drug situation, we divert them to begin with. They don't have to be convicted. They're diverted, and they work with probation officers, and there's a number of programs around Fairfax County and Loudoun, depending on what beds are available, and we're always short of beds, and we're always short of transitional housing. We need to put some money into these things because our community is sick with this opioid abuse, and we got to solve it. But that's how it works. Most are diverted. It's only the real serious ones, and I would guess Steve probably has the number, maybe 30 or so now in the drug intensive program.
Well, I really appreciate that question, and I think one of the key words in your question was the word incentivize, right? Because we know that a lot of these programs are intensive, as Ray said, and they're difficult. And people may not want to go into them if they're not properly incentivized. And we've actually seen that problem with our Veterans Court. Now I'm a veteran, and there are probably some people in here who are veterans or have veterans in their family. I know there's 72,000 veterans in Fairfax County and Fairfax City, people who we could be helping with the Veterans Court docket. But unfortunately, our Commonwealth's Attorney's Office acts as the gatekeeper for that program. They're also the ones who incentivize people or fail to incentivize people to get to that program. And what we have is we have this capacity to really help people, but we have less than 12 people in that program right now. And the reason is because they're not properly incentivized. They're not given a reason to come into this intensive program because they're not offered the opportunity to get a reduced charge or get their charge dropped if they were able to make it through the program. What they do is they get the same exact plea offer as if regardless of whether they go into the intensive program or regardless of if they don't. And that simply is a recipe for disaster. And that's the veterans docket. When you want to talk about the drug court docket, the drug court docket's only doing half the job. It's only after people have already been arrested and do a probation or a violation that they get into the program. Because we want to get people help, but at the same time we want to create a system where they can come out on the other side without a criminal record that's going to ruin them for the rest of their life. And our drug court is failing to do that. We need to expand them, and we need to make sure they're doing actually what they're supposed to be doing.
Thank you. This is the final question before we move to our rapid fire round. This question is to Mr. Toscano first. Right now, there are 12,000 Fairfax resident immigrants in deportation proceedings. Immigrants charged with local crimes are frequently detained by ICE before their local charges are resolved in Fairfax. Then the immigration court uses these unresolved allegations as a factor to favor their deportation. The Commonwealth's attorney has the authority to ask the immigration court to transfer the individual back to Fairfax to resolve these outstanding local issues before the deportation case proceeds. This helps the immigrant and also the Commonwealth, which is able to obtain resolution of its charges. Are you willing to adopt a policy agreeing to file these transfer requests, writs, and additionally, what specific actions have you taken or will you take to increase an immigrant's chances of avoiding deportation?
You know, really glad you asked that question because I think about that question quite a bit. I realize that I know it's trite to say, but our diversity in Fairfax County is our strength. And regardless of someone's immigration status, they're our neighbors and they deserve to be treated as our neighbors and get equal protection of the law. So to your first question, yes, that's a very simple. I will create a policy to ask for those writs. The other things that I'll do, there are a number that we can do to help our immigrant neighbors. The first thing is in the office. I'll create a policy that first of all, regardless, or for any victim, witness, or defendant that comes into my office, I won't talk to ICE or any immigration agency at all. We need to create a safe environment for our immigrant neighbors so that they can trust law enforcement and come to law enforcement when they need help. The second thing is, you can charge different acts a million different ways, and some have serious immigration consequences and some don't. I'll create a policy in my office to direct my prosecutors to, whenever possible, choose the charge that doesn't have the serious immigration consequence. And then the third thing is being an advocate. You know, one of the biggest issues that happens, one of the ways that people end up in deportation hearings is because of a small traffic accident, a busted taillight, a flat tire, or someone doesn't have a driver's license. And it's the police discretion to arrest that person or issue them a summons. And if they're arrested, that's when they end up in the ICE deportation machine. What I'll do is I will advocate with our police and our board of supervisors who are in charge of the police to take away some of that discretion so that individuals in that situation don't get put into custody, they get a summons. That's one more way that we can keep some of our immigrant neighbors away from ICE. Thank you.
Thank you. Very topical question. It's on all of our minds these days. You know, my parents are all immigrants. They came from, my grandparents are all immigrants, all had Irish brogues. No one is more sympathetic to the immigrant community in this county than I am. They are people who keep this county running. They work hard, sometimes 2 and 3 jobs, and they're often the victims of crimes. Why? Because they're vulnerable, like our elderly, like women sometimes, and children especially. They're a vulnerable population, and I treat them that way. And I've worked hard my whole career. The only time I work with ICE is to try to get U visas and UV visas for witnesses and victims of domestic crime. The domestic violence sometimes is horrific. We try to help those people stay here and become citizens. I believe in a path to citizenship for every human being in this county, and I believe that every human being in this county contributes to make this county a great county to live in. I don't work with ICE to support people, and I never will.
At this time, we will move into the lightning round portion of the forum. These questions are quick and should be answered with either a yes or a no. We will trade off who answers first. I will read the question, then ask each of you to answer. Again, yes or no. Will you commit to establishing a system for collecting and reporting data in your office that captures information on demographics, charging and bail recommendations, diversion, case processing, plea negotiations, and sentencing recommendations? Mr. Descano.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, but funded.
Would you commit to have another prosecutor who has no relationship with local law enforcement investigate any fatal shooting of someone by police in your locality? Mr. Morrow.
It's hard to answer that. I guess I have to say no.
It is very hard to answer that. I would also say no. I would love to expand on that, as I'm sure you would.
Okay, let me see. Talk to the boss.
Yes or no? Maybe when we come to the audience questions, you can expound. Will you commit to stop criminally prosecuting simple marijuana possession offenses and instead dismiss, divert, or treat those cases as civil infractions? Mr. Descano?
Yes.
Yes to divert.
Will you create and or release a policy that directs your prosecutors not to charge juveniles as adults? Mr. Morrow?
No.
Again, the same thing. No. I'd love to expand on it, but
Will you commit to form a community advisory board that includes members who have been directly impacted by the criminal justice system, that will meet monthly to discuss the community's priorities and how the Fairfax County Commonwealth's Attorney Office will respond to those issues? Mr. Descano?
yes.
Yes, and we have one witness.
I think we have a little bit more time. I'll let you two, I'll go back to the juvenile, prosecuting juveniles as adults question. There's been a lot of research that shows that individuals, youth, have not gained, youth brain development, right, doesn't really take hold until the age of 21 or so. And so I think in this instance, we'll put an age range on it. So youth who have not attained the age of, at a minimum, 21, would you commit to not trying them as an adult? Well, not, excuse me, not 21. So under the age of adulthood.
No, I will tell you that certification for juveniles is extremely rare, and it's for common sense reasons. The best interest of the child is really the foremost thing in juvenile court. These people are going to grow up. You don't want them to think of themselves as criminals and act like criminals the rest of their lives. But I've got a white supremacist now who went into his girlfriend's house and killed her parents. I'm certified. I've had young kids stab and rape a 3-year-old baby. I'm certified. I mean, sometimes I have to do that. It's not fun. I don't like to do it. I try to do it as rarely as possible, but sometimes it's necessary. But I say the vast majority of kids, you can save them, and we should. And there ought to be a loop. There ought to be a way at the end of any sentence for any juvenile to get out of prison someday if he or she has reformed, no matter what their sentence is. Because we shouldn't be throwing people away at a tender age, and then when they're 50, they're better. We're a compassionate people, and we should never forget that.
You know, I think that what you brought up with brain development is incredibly important, and it's something that we really need to focus on and remember, because a lot of people don't realize that certification for juvenile into adult court, really in a lot of ways, the most powerful person in that process is the prosecutor. There are cases where a judge may not want to do it, but the prosecutor has the ability to do it based on the statute or the crime charge. But to me, we need to always remember that when kids make a mistake, it's not because they're criminals, it's because they're kids, right? And we need to do everything we can to keep these kids out of our adult system. And that means because if we can keep them in a juvenile system, we can get at the root causes and we can allow them to come out on the other side as productive members of our community, that's what we should want. We never want to look at a kid and think, this kid is disposable, this life has no meaning, etc. That's why, I'm in favor of things like Delegate Guzman's bill to not be able to certify kids. Right now you can do it at age 14, but not to be able to do it under the age of 16. And I will do everything in my power in every case possible to not certify these kids. And I'll certainly never do something that I hear happens, which is threatening certification to squeeze a plea out of somebody. But as I sit here, I do not know exactly what case is going to walk through that door. I think it's a very, very infinitesimal chance that we get some kid who is so horrible that we need to certify them. But I'm trying to be honest, and I want to be accountable to all of you. That's why I think the answer that I gave was what I gave, because I never know what is going to walk into that front door.
Thank you. Now we will go to questions from the audience, and I have quite a few, so I'll try to get through as many of them as possible. Some of these questions, though, have already been answered by the candidates, so I'll try to focus on questions that have not previously been asked. Okay, the first question we have. What is each candidate's view on solitary confinement? Yes, sorry, Mr. Descano.
I'm against solitary confinement. I think most of us can look at it and see that it's inhumane and it serves no purpose. All it does is add to more psychological trauma to someone who is likely already inflicted with some psychological trauma. Now, a lot of you might say, or some of you might say, well, yeah, but that's not really in the purview of the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. But I will tell you that this job, it does not begin and end in the four walls of the courthouse. This job is a leader job, it's a job for an advocate, it is a bully pulpit job in Fairfax County, and the reason I tell you is this. You may not recognize it, but the most powerful lobbying group in all of Virginia, when you go down to Richmond, is your Commonwealth Attorney's Office, or your Commonwealth Attorneys. Our senators and our delegates, I've talked to a bunch of them, endorsed me, and they tell me, look, Steve, we need a partner here. We want to pass criminal justice reform, we want to pass progressive reforms, but we're not experts on it. We need your help. We need a partner in that office. We need somebody who's going to put ideas out into the ether, help us create bills, come down to Richmond and testify for bills and help twist arms. And that's what I'm committing to do, because I know that this job is a big job and I need to be your advocate in the criminal justice system. And one of the areas in which we can do that is on solitary confinement. Because I look around and I know a lot of you individuals here see it as the barbaric and inhumane treatment that I see it as. And as your Commonwealth's attorney, I will go down and I will work with our legislators to be a voice and advocate for you and try to end that practice in Virginia.
I agree with Steve on solitary confinement. It might be necessary at some time to isolate someone for a discrete period of time who may be out of control or something, but somebody once said, I was Churchill or somebody, that the best measure of a civilized society is how it treats its criminals. And I think we should treat our criminals like we treat everybody, with dignity. The penalty might be incarceration. They might have done something really bad, but they shouldn't be tortured psychologically or physically. They should be treated with respect and dignity at all points in the system, and I've always believed in that. As far as the most powerful group in the General Assembly, there's a reason in terms of lobbying that every state senator who lives in Fairfax County, every Democratic state senator, has endorsed me, because I do work with them. On what? Criminal justice reform. I went down for Chap Peterson in 2007, before this was a big issue, and testified to raise the grand larceny threshold. I've done all sorts of testimony for domestic violence. The one thing Steve leaves out of his presentation, and you won't see it in the program, which is, I think, written by somebody else, is the word victim. There are victims in the system. They really are, and they suffer a lot. Doesn't mean we can't treat the accused with respect, but we can never forget the victims. And yes, I go to Richmond. A lot of times for victims, sometimes for defendants, like on the grand larceny threshold, which I thought wasn't fair 10 years ago. It's still not fair. It's only $500. It ought to be $1,500 or $2,500.
Thank you. Countless studies have shown that the death penalty is fraught with error, provides no public safety benefit than other sentences, and is routinely imposed on people with diminished culpability. Studies also show that the death penalty is applied in a racially discriminatory manner. Would you commit to never seeking the death penalty? Yes or no? Mr. Morrow, thank you, sorry.
No, I could not do that. Again, it's a law. There is a law, and I have to give the death penalty mature consideration. Prosecutor down in Florida said she wouldn't prosecute death penalty. Her name is Ayala. Got reversed. The Attorney General sued her, and now they've got a special group in there that reviews it. Look, I don't like the death penalty. I'm a Christian. I'm actually a Roman Catholic. I don't believe in it. I take Tim Kaine's approach when he was governor. I don't like it, but I will enforce it. Somebody goes into a school or a municipal building like in Virginia Beach and shoots 12 people, I'm going to give it some mature consideration. I'm going to look at the person, what's their mental status, what's their past history, and everything else. But it's the law. And I'm going to execute the law whether I like it or not. Again, we're a nation of laws, not men. The death penalties I've sought have been the most horrific cases. The most horrific cases. I'm not even going to give you the details. I'm talking strangling babies with belts after raping mother and things like that. Folks, there's some bad people out there. We got an incredibly safe county, but there's some bad people. They can do away with the death penalty, is fine with me. But if someone comes here and shoots everybody in a church or a synagogue, I'm going to consider it.
For the reasons you so eloquently put in your question, I will tell you right now, I will never ask for the death penalty. That's period, full stop. It's barbaric, it has a racist implementation, and it costs so much money to try and continue with the appeals of those cases. And as a matter of fact, you know, a lot of the victims of these crimes, every time they have to go through one of these appeals, they relive their trauma. So the death penalty, I think our values are clear in Fairfax County. Fairfax County, we should end the death penalty in Fairfax County. You know, and I will tell you, I take issue with the way that my opponent presents how he decides on whether or not to ask for the death penalty. Because as a matter of fact, right now there are 2 cases that are on appeal based on death penalty reversals. And one of them was a case that was actually just brought up by the Supreme Court of the United States, where my opponent was accused of vindictively seeking the death penalty, less than 24 hours after he'd gotten a case, vindictively seeking it because someone had successfully appealed their prior death penalty conviction. And the Supreme Court of the United States actually told the Virginia Supreme Court, you have to look at this case, because not only do we have that, but in that case, we had 59 prosecutors, judges, and other attorneys write to the presiding judge and say, my opponent is acting vindictively. He should not be on this case with the way he is seeking this death penalty. The death penalty is something we should not have in Fairfax County, and I'm committed to stopping it in Fairfax County.
What changes would you support on the use of civil asset forfeiture?
That's not fair. He's not able to.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Mr. Morrow, please respond. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Respond.
Wow, I'd love to respond.
No. It was just, you already answered the question, Mr. Morrow, correct?
I think.
Yes, you did. Okay, I apologize. What changes would you support on the use of civil asset forfeiture? Mr. Escano.
The civil asset forfeiture really isn't something that I support. You know, too often what we have is we have people who have not been found guilty of any crime, but the government uses their power to take someone's property. And, you know, the excuse that I hear all the time is, well, you know, we found this case, we found this car, and it had drugs, and it had all this money, and we couldn't really make the prosecution. So we decided to use civil asset forfeiture and just take the car and take all the money. I can't believe in those cases that are that cut and dry, as it's usually presented by someone who's in favor of civil asset forfeiture, that you can't make that case. I think that's a canard. I think most of the time with civil asset forfeiture, it's where the case is so shaky and the property is so attenuated from the possible crime that a prosecutor knows, I can never make this case. But what I can do because of a lower burden of proof is I can take this and I can use and you know, bring the money in and take a piece of it for my office and use it to fund programs. I don't think that that's what we want from our government. We want our government to treat us fairly. We want our government to allow us to go and live our lives. We don't need them putting their thumb on the scale so that they can take our property when they're not able to prove that we committed a crime. So I am not in favor of asset forfeiture unless there's already been a criminal conviction associated with that piece of property.
But once again, the issue is a little more complicated than that. It isn't a situation where the cases are, or it's too much trouble to prove, or whatever he said. You know, a lot of times it's a car coming up 95 and there's 6 kilos of coke in the trunk and it's spilled all over, and there's a big cake of money in the trunk, and the driver says, "Oh, I'm just driving the car for someone else. It's not my stuff." And it sits there, and the government forfeits it. No one ever claims it. I guess they could come and say, "Well, that was my money," but then they'd be in trouble on the case. So it's a little tricky. Forfeiture's not a big deal for me. I don't really care if we have it or not. I do think the money is put to good use for training and whatnot, but I don't see the abuses. I've seen abuses around the country with forfeiture. I've seen the government overreach and departments trying to fund programs based on it. That's wrong. But the ones I see, they're fair. A lot of times they're just agreed. But it's not like he says, is all I can tell you.
Mr. Morrow, what regulations would you support on the police's use of surveillance technologies like license plate readers, cell phone tracking devices, and facial recognition softwares?
That's topical. I don't know if anyone has seen the case recently where the officer put a chalk mark on a tire, and the case came out and said that's a search, so they can't do it anymore. So it's a real tricky area of law. My thinking on this is that our right to privacy, our right to be free of government intrusion is sacred, and it's embraced in our Constitution, and I believe in it. In fact, I took an oath to support the Constitution, and I do. I think there should be probable cause in these situations. A neutral and detached magistrate should make the decision, and that's the way to have a buffer between a prosecutor, a police officer, and the public. That's the fairest way that I know how to do it.
You know, I know this might shock you, but I actually agree with everything you said. No, it's true. You know, our right to be free from government intrusion is sacred. It's something that we really should not take for granted, right? As Commonwealth's attorneys, we do have a responsibility to always keep that in mind when we're thinking about building our cases and how we're going to build our cases. You know, things like the plate reader issue that you mentioned. And I'm in total agreement with the recent case that directed police departments to get rid of that data after so many days, because otherwise it was just being kept for surveillance and list-keeping purposes. We can't have that. That's not what we want from our government. Again, the role of our government is to help us and to keep us safe. It's not to do things that impinge on our privacy. So as far as all of that goes, again, I agree with my opponent. Probable cause for any of those searches or seizures, probable cause is something that we need to have, and we need to be able to get it from a detached and neutral magistrate. Otherwise, that puts us down this slippery slope towards giving up our rights, and I don't think that that's something anyone in this room really wants to see. And by the way, the idea that we should do that because it keeps us more safe, I think all of us in this room are too smart to know that that's not the truth.
Thank you. While incarcerated in Fairfax County awaiting trial, people are charged a fee for their stay. What will you do about that? Mr. Morrow.
Well, there are court costs associated with everything. If you get convicted, if you have a trial and you don't win, if you're the defendant and you're convicted, there's a fee of several $100s for the jury. There's a fee for a traffic case. It's built into our system. The fee for the jail, that's a new one on me. I didn't realize that. I would waive that fee and ask to be released if it was me. But I do think that there is a sentiment out there, at least in the General Assembly has been, that the consumers of the system should pay for it to a certain extent. Those who are using the services of the court, whether it's drunk driving or reckless driving, should pay for it if they're convicted. I'm not sure that's wrong. But nobody should go to jail if they can't pay it. Nobody should be punished if they can't pay it. Because, again, as my opponent has pointed out, You don't want to monetize the system. Everyone needs to be treated fairly, whether they're homeless or they're a rich person who lives in McLean.
You know, I think those types of fees, the fees that you mentioned, really have the potential to hurt our individuals, our community members, and really take our system of justice and turn it into a two-tier system of justice where we penalize people simply for being poor. Now, whether that fee, regardless of what form it takes and what it's charged for, what have you, we need to make sure that our criminal justice system is fair and treats everybody equally. And again, the role of the Commonwealth's attorney, part of that role is to be an advocate for you, the community, in our criminal justice system. And what I would be committed to doing on that is working with every stakeholder at the local, at the state level, at the courthouse, and the jail, and trying to figure out what is the purpose of these. Are they discriminatory? How can we get rid of them? Because when we have a system that monetizes people, or is monetized and treats people differently, people lose faith in that system and look at it kind of with questions, and we don't want that. So from the Commonwealth attorney perspective, what my role would be is to work with our stakeholders, the people who assess that fee, and try to figure out a way to get that fee away and try to advocate for what I think we all want here, which is treating everybody equally, regardless of how much money they make, the color of their skin, or which part of the county they live in.
Most fatalities involving law enforcement do not go to trial. If elected, how do you propose to balance your duties to hold law enforcement accountable to the people with your reliance on them to try a case? Mr. Toscano.
That is a question that is incredibly important, and I'm glad that it finally came up. You know, I think the biggest thing that we need to realize is that right now there is not a lot of trust between our community and the criminal justice system. And that's got to be job number one when it comes to being a Commonwealth's attorney, is rebuilding that trust. And what we got to know is we don't rebuild that trust on the day when a crisis hits. We rebuild it every other day of the year in ways big and small. And that's going to be job number one for me, is to rebuild that trust. And that means getting out in the community, inviting people in, bringing the criminal justice system out of the courthouse and into the community, bringing the community into our office. You know, I think it is incredibly important that somewhere along the line, someone has to say on these cases, the buck stops here. And as a matter of fact, that's the reason why I would want to keep the cases of police shootings in Fairfax County in the Fairfax County Commonwealth Attorney's Office. Because the community deserves someone that is accountable directly to them to be the one to make that decision. Because if the decision is made poorly, or is made not thoroughly, or is done the wrong way, you, the voters, need to be able to hold us accountable. So the idea, how we're going to deal with this, is we're going to focus on building trust, being out in front, being open with our process, and doing the right thing, and explaining so that you will always be able to hold us in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office accountable.
Thank you. Well, I also agree with my opponent. It is vital to our system of justice that the police are held accountable, and the prosecutors are held accountable, and the judges are held accountable. And we do that. We have a policy in my office. It's called the Brady List. If an officer tells a lie about a case or about something that's duty related, we keep a list and we let every defense attorney and every defendant know who that officer is. Because whether you got a red light ticket and you say, well, the officer, the light was green, he's lying, you should know that. The police have a special duty, just like prosecutors. It's a higher duty. You have to be above pettiness and losing your temper. You're held to a higher standard. I have prosecuted police officers for various crimes, and a few years ago, as everybody knows, I prosecuted one for killing somebody. I'm proud I did it because it was the right thing to do. It wasn't fun. Police union said I made them want to vomit. I got a lot of nasty emails and such, but I did the right thing. And I did what the family asked me to do at the end. I'm not tied in with the Fairfax police any more than any other police department. We have 7 of them I deal with, plus the FBI. It would be easy to send the attorney cases to the Attorney General, but I have to agree with Steve. I am accountable. I fought the county when they tried to stymie that prosecution, and I won. I did it all by myself, and I'm proud of it.
Conviction review units, also known as conviction integrity units, are being created in prosecutors' offices all over the country as a means of increasing accountability and ensuring that justice is consistently served. These units scrutinize old cases to determine whether the outcomes were tainted by unjust practices, faulty evidence, or bias. Will you commit to creating a conviction integrity unit in Fairfax County? Mr. Morrow.
Thanks, Secure.
Yes, I have it, and guess who the chief officer of the conviction review unit is? Me, because I've tried the most murders of anyone probably in the state, and rapes and other assorted crimes. So myself, my chief deputy, and one of my other deputies review those cases. We get requests from attorneys. We've worked with the Mid-Atlantic Innocence Project, which is a great group of people who scrutinize cases. Mistakes can be made. It's a human system. Mistakes are made. We're working right now with an Innocence Project on a case that happened in the 70s, and I believe we're going to get rid of actual innocence for the man based on some faulty examination. My thing in my life is I never want to wake up and see in the newspapers or on the news somebody walking out of prison who's been there for 30 years and I had something to do with it. That's why I have an open file discovery process. That's why I don't count convictions. I tell my assistants, I'm not going to count your convictions. Do justice. Be fair. And that's the way we do it. And I'll continue to work with the Innocence Project and all my friends, defense attorneys. Obviously, I know a lot of defense attorneys, and they come to me and they trust me because I'm fair. And I'll do the right thing no matter what it costs.
Yes, I would commit to creating a conviction integrity unit because I think what we all need to realize, and I think most of us do realize, is that the job of the prosecutor is not to simply win cases. The job of the prosecutor is something I've learned day one at the Department of Justice. The job of the prosecutor is to do justice. And sometimes that means going back and looking over old cases. And if someone is innocent or there has been a problem, realizing that we made a mistake, not covering it up, and actually doing the right thing. So of course I would be committing to creating a conviction integrity unit. But we also need to focus on trying to avoid as much as possible that happening in the future, right? Trying to make sure that we know convict an innocent person. And there are a number of ways we can do that. Having a really robust, as my opponent mentioned, Brady list, where we don't take cases from officers who have been proven to be unreliable or proven to lie. That keeps bad testimony off of the stand. The other thing that we can do is really having robust open file discovery. And I'm not talking about open file discovery in name only. I'm talking about real open file discovery, the stuff that every defense attorney gets what's important so that you can build a defense. Now, I know we've talked about open file discovery, but I mean for everything, including police reports. And I think that's actually a difference between my opponent and me. If you read a Virginia Lawyers Weekly article from about a year ago, when the Supreme Court was trying to make that a rule change, my opponent was the person who was quoted as being against giving defense attorneys access to police reports. So what we're going to do is we're going to do real open file discovery to make sure that this never happens again in the future.
Why do you or why do you not support restoring the right to vote to individuals who have completed their sentences and parole? Mr. Toscano.
I 100% support that. I supported Governor McAuliffe's move to do that, and as a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons why he endorsed me in this race. Because my opponent actually joined the Republican lawsuit to stop Governor McAuliffe from giving voting rights back to people. And the reason was, well, that's the way it's always been. But I will tell you even more disturbing than that is we all know that that was a vestige of Jim Crow. All you have to do is open the paper, read a newspaper article, listen to anybody. Well, when my opponent was asked, well, what about the disparate impact this has on people of color? His response was to shrug his shoulders, say, it never occurred to me, something I never thought about. It was just in the law when I got my job, and I never gave it a thought. That is Exhibit A and why we need new leadership in the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office. We need reform. We need somebody who can get away from the same old, because that's the way it's always been. Because we know that in our criminal justice system, our racism is systemic. It rarely comes up and punches you in the face like it did in that case. And if we have someone leading our criminal justice system who can't see the racist outcomes from that, how can you trust that person to get in there, find the systemic discrimination, and do real reform to make a criminal justice system that is equal for everyone? I put it to you that you cannot. That's Exhibit A as to why we need to get away from the status quo and move into the 21st century with real criminal justice reform.
Well, let's get to the whole truth. I have always supported restoration of voting rights. In fact, I've been to the left of my opponent until he just recently had a forum changed his tune. I don't think anybody should ever lose their voting rights unless they're convicted of treason or terrorism, coming into a church and shooting people. Don't we want people to come out of the penitentiary, rehabilitated, and be back in society? I've never been against that. What I was against, and I didn't join the Republicans, I joined a bipartisan group, black, white, brown, prosecutors, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, 53 courageous people who stood up to Terry McAuliffe and said, wait a second, why are you linking the right to petition for a firearm to this? There's too many handguns out there. Just give the voting rights back. Don't link it to firearms. And he wouldn't listen. So we did it. So right now, I have a child internet predator, got himself a handgun. I've got MS-13 members who are petitioning for handguns, given the list that he gave. I just thought it made common sense for your safety for the governor to review each case and see, was it a gun crime that was committed before you give the firearms rights back. And we even said in the brief, we're not against the voting rights. So, and whatever he's talking about is not accurate. I can explain it later, don't have time now, about what I said in another forum.
Do you support detox programs in lieu of jail for drunk in public or non-felony DUIs? Yes or no? Mr. Morrow?
Absolutely, yes.
Yes.
I might have to do yes or no for the rest of these questions so we can get through them. Would you maintain detailed statistics which show the rates of detentions and arrests based on race and socioeconomic status, and would you make these stats public? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, if it's funded.
What will you do to see that, no, this is not yes or no, but what will you do to see that white-collar crimes are more vigorously prosecuted? Mr. Moore, I believe it is.
Well, we work hard on white-collar crimes. They affect our businesses, employment of our people, and we vigorously prosecute them.
You know, white-collar crime is incredibly important. A lot of people are under this mistaken impression that white-collar crime doesn't hurt anybody, but we know that it does. It ruins, it hurts industries, it hurts workers, it hurts their families, it hurts entire communities. You know, a big part of my prosecutorial experience background, I did a lot of white-collar work at the highest level. So I'm not afraid to do it, I know how to do it. As a matter of fact, I'm committed to do it. And that is actually the reason why I've been endorsed by every major labor group. Because they know that they need somebody in this office who's going to stand up to wage theft, who's going to help them with white-collar crime. Because make no mistake, it may not be the thing that hits the newspapers or the headlines every single day, but in a lot of ways, white-collar crime can be as dangerous and debilitating to a community as other crimes. So I'm committed to doing it. That's my background. I'll focus on it.
Both the Board of Supervisors and the school board have embraced One Fairfax, whereby future policy would advance through a racial and social equity lens. What do you think of this policy, and how would it shape your approach to criminal justice over the next 4 years? Mr. Descano.
Well, I think One Fairfax is a great policy. I mean, we are a diverse community, and I think we need to celebrate that. But we also need to realize that there's systemic discriminations, and we need to realize that we need to focus on this. We need to take a systemic approach if we're ever going to root out that systemic issue. You know, for criminal justice reform, that is something that I think about quite frequently. You know, I know that I can be try to be as open-minded as possible. But I know that at the end of the day, I'm still rooted to my experiences and my background as a straight white man. So what we need to do, what I plan to do is invite and try to recruit attorneys who have different backgrounds than me, different experiences than me, not for tokenism purposes, but for the idea of building bridges to other communities so they can take that information back about what they need back into this office so that those things can be reflected in our policies and procedures. You know, the other part of this criminal justice reform we talk about, it's not just a 1 year or 2 year plan, it's way in the future. You know, I have this thing where in my mind I call it the bench for the bench. I mean, if you take a look at our bench in our judiciary in Fairfax County, it's white male dominated in a lot of ways. And what we need to do is we need to build a bench for the bench. And if you take a look at where a lot of judges come from, they come from a background in the prosecutor's office. So what I want to do is when I have these individuals, I recruit them to my office, I want to put them in positions of leadership and get them on the cutting edge so that they will be great candidates going forward for the judiciary.
Well, I agree with Steve on all of that, really. I think One Fairfax is a beautiful thing for this county, and once again, it's something that'll serve to make us healthier and happier people and more effective. What I've done in this regard, and I think every public official has a duty to do something about the racial disparity in our county, and as Steve said, he was basically talking about implicit bias. So what I've done is I've established a shadow program. And I'm proud to tell you that I have a young man, a Hispanic man, who's about to graduate from Catholic University Law School that I brought in. He shadowed attorneys, then he went to law school. I have an African American child I've written letters for. He wants to now be a lawyer, prosecutor, and a judge. I have an Asian young man who's now a prosecutor in Hawaii that went through that program. We also recruit at historically black schools. We're looking to make our office look like the community. Right now, we just lost one of our African American assistants. We're about 24% minority. We can do better, but I'm working on it. I see that as one of my responsibilities as a public official, and I'm working hard on it, and I think I'll even do better as time goes on.